Welcome back to the Fraser Rice Podcast. Today we get to speak with Bill Yoh. Bill Yoh is the author of Our Way, which is the story of Philadelphia businessman Spike Yoh. He serves as a speaker, biographer, and strategist. Bill is also the third-generation owner of Day & Zimmermann, the family's 43,000-employee, century-old business. Welcome aboard, Bill.
Thanks, Fraser. It's great to be here.
So help us understand a little bit about your background and how you went from working with the family business to becoming an author.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. So I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and my family is now the third generation and fourth generation owners of Day & Zimmermann, which is a 117-year-old business headquartered here in Philadelphia. And I had spent the majority of my career since college working at the business in a number of different business unit and corporate roles and ultimately in some executive and leadership capacities. And I'd always written in my career but never written as a career. And about 3 years ago, my mom got sick, and during the trips back and forth to the hospital, my father started talking about his past in ways he never had before, and I found it very fascinating and started to think about maybe we'd hire a biographer to capture his story. And then my mom subsequently passed away, and so I started thinking about different things and where I was in my life and decided, why don't I be the one to capture Spike's story, my father's story, and that's really how it got started.
Oh, that's really cool. I sort of think about this, and I got started reading the book, and it gets me to think about Ray Dalio's principles and some of the components of what makes people successful and how they learn from their mistakes. When did you start triangulating around that and focusing on your father's successes and mistakes and the lessons learned from them?
Sure. Well, obviously, being his son and the youngest of his 5 children and also having a little bit of time where we overlapped professionally before, my siblings and I bought the company from him, I got to see a lot of that in action from a business perspective, but more so, obviously, from a family perspective. But what really started to come out as he started to talk about his past was what a challenging childhood he had had. And we had always kind of known that, but he hadn't talked a lot about it. And, he really had a very tough, contentious relationship with his father. His father was married 4 times. His mother was an alcoholic and ended up dying from drink. And so, we talk all the time about building resilience and grit in children, and unfortunately it was built in Spike, but in a very difficult way. And so getting into the interview process with him and unpacking a lot of those things, it really became apparent and kind of amazing how much he was able to really pivot off of a tough childhood, and his college years at Duke were really the inflection point, and then to set himself out to vow to be, a man of integrity, to be a man who's always optimistic, who's always engaging with people and those kind of things. And so I think it was a lot of the failures and difficulties of childhood that really spurred him on to the successful life he had or has had, and really buoyed a lot by my mom, his wife of 56 years, who we met during his time at Duke.
So tell us a little bit about Day & Zimmermann and what they do and how Spike's leadership and the attributes that he brought to it, how he helped take what was a good business founded by your grandfather and took it to the next level.
Sure. So just a real quick history lesson. So Day & Zimmermann itself was started in 1901 by a couple engineers out of the University of Pennsylvania, independent of our family. And then in the early 1940s, my grandfather, Harold Yoh, started a company that ended up being one of the nation's first technical staffing companies, so for part-time and contract positions in the technical areas. In 1961, both Yoh and Day, and that was called the Yoh Company, both Yoh and Day & Zimmermann had grown, and my grandfather ended up, as the smaller company, Yoh, buying Day & Zimmermann, the larger company. And so starting in 1961 to today, the Yoh family owns Day & Zimmermann, and the Yoh Company is a subsidiary of Day & Zimmermann underneath it. Early on in Day & Zimmermann's career, there were some really interesting projects. 7 years into our existence in 1908, we helped build the Panama Canal and set a world record for hauling concrete. In the around 1914, we invented the machine that wraps Hershey's Kisses. That's largely still in use today. The 1930s, we worked with the Safeway Foods Corporation to devise the first layout for a supermarket. So a lot of things very innovative have been around the company since it started. My father always worked in the business in school summers and more or less full-time after college. And in the mid-'70s, he bought his father out. And as I had mentioned earlier, they had a pretty contentious relationship. So it wasn't, my father had to outbid 2 outside contractors, 2 outside companies to retain control of the business. But he was, set on wanting to do that. He'd lined up his managers to do a management buyout, which was not something that was all that common at the time. And then they were also able to use the assets and the contracts of the firm as collateral to borrow the resources to buy out his father. So they did both a management buyout and a leverage buyout at a time in the mid-'70s when neither one of them were very common. And from there, he really set out to really instill a culture of growth, a culture of entrepreneurship, but above everything, a culture about a focus on people, but above everything else, a culture on values and specifically on the value of integrity. That that was something that has always fueled his life and how he's operated and permeated every facet of the business.
So one of the things that I was struck about reading a little bit about Dane Zimmermann, the motto is both so simple but so powerful. Where did that come from, and I guess how did that come from the value system that he developed?
Yeah, so our motto is "We do what we say." It's something we're super proud of. We trademarked it years and years ago, and it really does, in one phrase, sum up the culture and the attitude of a 43,000 employee company. And we talk about it both from the standpoint of if we're making a commitment to a customer or to a supplier or partner, that we are committed to do what we say we will do. And it even boils down to a simply, if you call me in the morning and I'm busy and I say I'm going to call you back in the afternoon, that's a commitment that we expect to honor. So the genesis of it was there was a period of time about 10 years into my father's ownership and chairmanship of the business where there were a couple pockets of culture and divisions within the business that were not abiding by integrity at all times. And so my dad, and actually I talk about this story in the book, came up with the phrase, "I do what I say," to get people to focus on that whole idea of accountability. At least by our family standards, a number of things happened, and people suggested that, geez, Dad, it should really be we, not I. And there's no less than probably 3 or 4 people who all claim sort of be the ones to spur him to change the pronoun from I to we. And he did that, and that really just had everything drop right in place because that introduced the whole idea of a team accountability to things. And, we have lapel pins, we have signs all over our offices, it's on our stationery, our letterheads, our logos, and it really does, better than anything, personify what our large but very much family-driven business is all about.
The motto is established and is sort of the centerpiece about how you do things at the business level. How did he involve community and family into that corporate mission? And your brother is running the company now. You were involved with it. You've had various family members part of it. How did he think about that and put that into the sort of the corporate framework?
Sure. He was always a family-first person, and I think largely stemming from the difficult childhood and family experience he had when he was younger. So he always had the family be a part of the business. Whenever he'd do corporate retreats, his family would often go with him. He would have, several times during the year, different events at his house. He and my mom would, and we'd always be present at those. We worked at the business a lot. So really the strand of family, of business, and of community and philanthropy have always been the 3 sort of key thrusts in his life. The family side fueled by, as I said, the 56-year marriage to my mom. They had 5 children, 14 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and the way that he's had always combined the family with the business, so they kind of went hand in hand with each other. And when he took the business over from his father, it was a little over $100 million in the mid-'70s, and by the time we bought it from him in the late '90s, it was $1.1 billion with 16,000 employees. So his ability to grow the business and be very entrepreneurial and take risks, but also infuse this family culture and this family presence were things that not only grew the business, but set the business up for success when my siblings and I came more into management and ultimately leadership positions.
It can't have possibly been a perfectly smooth experience getting through that. Where were some of the difficulties along that road?
Yeah, no, and it absolutely wasn't. And we've learned a lot. And any time when you're talking about a family business, the whole idea of succession is really a challenge. And no 2 generations experience a succession event together or the same. And so, there were certain things that when we were getting ready to buy the business from our father that he was very involved with, and most notably about, the valuation of the stock and the treatment of his one remaining non-family shareholder, his one remaining partner who was our CFO. But beyond that, he really said to the 5 of us, you 5 need to go figure out what this business is going to look like once I'm gone. And that provided some real opportunities for us, but also some challenges for us. So when we took ownership of the business, the 5 of us had an average age of 33, and we had 16,000 employees. So we put in a number of practices and governance mechanisms to ensure that the business, and most notably, senior management, knew that the 5 of us were not even close to equipped to being able to run the business. So really, trying to separate those ideas of when you have your employee or your manager hat on and when you have your owner hat on was a learning curve for us. But we're proud to say we didn't lose any of our senior managers at the time. We faced some economic headwinds shortly after the transition, and then shortly after that 9/11. But the company was able to weather a lot of those things, as we have for over a century. And you grow from those mistakes and grow from those challenge times, and that's something we were able to do.
One of the things that I see in my day job as it relates to family businesses, and it sounds like you were blessed in the sense that you had people who, within that next generation, who were both qualified and interested. How did you diagnose strengths and weaknesses within what I would describe as your 5-member management ownership team so that you knew ahead of time that you had the right people in place, notwithstanding sort of cultural lineage and those types of attributes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a couple different aspects of it. Part of it is just having an overriding philosophy and commitment to running the business as a business, and understanding where are the places that family involvement and that familyness can affect that and help that, but where are the places where it may hurt that. So we were very conscious of that at all times. And then among the 5 of us, we spent a lot of time early on working together as a group, working with different consultants and coaches, and mainly initially exploring, the dynamics among us, the communications among us, things that may have been getting in the way of us that we weren't even aware of. So, for example, as I mentioned, I'm the youngest of 5 in the family. The other 4 kids are about 5.5, 6 years apart, and then I'm 5 years behind the 4 of them. And during this work with this one coach, we discovered that I had always had a feeling that the 4 of them kind of excluded me, and they were sort of the 4 older ones, and they had this kind of club, and I wasn't a member of it. Conversely, they all had an opinion that I sort of was aloof to them and didn't want to be part of their club kind of thing. And I remember the day and the place and everything about when we all kind of realized that wasn't at all what either side was thinking, and everybody wanted to be 5, not 4 and 1. And just going through those kinds of things and some of the cliche things that family business will talk about, that you don't want to let the fact that sibling A didn't lend sibling B their baseball glove when they were younger, therefore they're not going to endorse their initiative as working professionals. And a lot of those things really helped set the table for us to understand, A, how do we communicate, B, how do we keep the company's needs first and foremost, because we have this great important company that's important to our family, but more important to our employees, to our customers. And then thirdly, when, as you'd mentioned, when kind of interests started to diverge, and subsequent to our buying my father out, 2 of my siblings ended up leaving the business and cashing out their ownership stakes. We were able to go through those processes in a way, or those events in a way that didn't tear the family apart, that people were leaving the business but not leaving the family, and a way to kind of keep some cohesion in place, even as we all sort of started to separate a little bit.
So one of the things that I'm struck by your example there is that you, the next generation, were doing a lot of this yourself. Where did your father help out in terms of providing advice or guiding principles, and then where did you bring in expertise to help you navigate this new course?
Sure. So, Spike had a really interesting approach as regard to helping us out. So he's been a natural leader his whole life. He has a very strong philosophy that says, get involved in a lot of things if you're passionate about them, but don't get involved in them if you're not prepared to lead them and make a difference in them. And so he really, exhibited that track record both in terms of his business career and his volunteer career. But part of that ethos for him was that, once his leadership tenure was over, it was time for him to move aside and let the next generation or the next leader take over, whether that was his kids in the business or somebody who succeeded him as the chair of whatever organizations he was involved with. And part of that was he's been a member of the Young Professionals Organization, YPO, and that was an incredibly beneficial source of mentorship and advice and training for him in terms of not just business, but across all facets of his life. And one of the things he had seen through his time at YPO was when the patriarch of a business hangs on too long and is still owning and operating the business into their 70s and even their 80s and sometimes in 90s, and you have this next generation of capable people who have also grown up in the business who are kind of a hand tied behind their back. And so he didn't want to see that happen with us. And then the other part of it, we do a lot of work with the U.S. government, and in the military world, there's a practice when a base commander for a military base is typically a lieutenant colonel or a colonel. That officer will be assigned to run that base for, say, 2 to 3 years. When their term is up, they leave that base and they never return. It's somebody else's command now. And he he fostered and believed in that kind of philosophy as well. So him with YPO, there was a 2-year transition period when my oldest brother, who's our chairman and CEO, was the president under my father. They both talk about that as being one of the highlights of their careers, where there was really a lot of mentoring and training and sharing of responsibility and the like. And then, as I'd mentioned, we as a fivesome have, some of us benefit from YPO. We continue to use family business consultants. We do a lot of networking within the family business community. And from a business perspective, a number of us have been very engaged in trade associations. And in fact, all of the owners of the business have all chaired at one time or another a large trade association representing some facet of Day & Zimmermann.
Neat. So how do you intersect when you had these decisions being made, and obviously with your brother and your father having a 2-year transition, from a board of directors standpoint and then from the employees standpoint, communication to those constituencies, I think, is part and parcel with what you would do. How did you get vendors and customers aligned with your decisions?
A lot of it, as I said earlier, was that commitment to run the business as a business. So whoever were in those customer-facing aspects, whoever were in those vendor-facing aspects, our financial teams that dealt with our banking relationships, we always wanted to be very communicative with them and let them know that, that ownership is changing, but these are all the things we're committed to and to your success. And that, one of the things we did when we bought out my father was we put an advisory board in place. So as I said, we were all in our 20s and 30s at the time, and so we collected the proverbial gray hairs from various aspects of industry and family business experience and all those kind of things, who were able to not only give us advice as a young ownership group, but also we charged them with the responsibility of any time there was a promotion opportunity within the business that involved a Yoh family member, they, the board of advisors, made the ultimate decision, not the family or the manager, as to who was going to get that job. Because, again, we wanted to make sure that our employees and our customers, and most importantly our managers, all knew that we were committed to the business being run successfully.
Philanthropy is a major part of the tools that we use to help families make decisions together, to sort of find some common ground as to shared values. And it's obvious that, values are a big part of the business and your family. Where did philanthropy fit in terms of the corporate transition, and how does it fit in going forward?
Yeah, no, and it's a really important part of our family and our business's activities, our commitment to community, our commitment to philanthropy, our commitment to giving back, to recognizing that, those who are blessed with more have a higher obligation to do more. And that really started a lot with our father. His first involvement was really in the Philadelphia business community, as a business leader in a growing company. So things like the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce and other industrial development corporations and things like that. And then he'd always had a passion for children and for education, so he was very involved in various regional and national roles with the Boy Scouts. He was chairman of the board of the Haverford School here in Philadelphia, chairman of the board of Duke University. So a lot of things having to do with education in terms of giving back. And then also from a broader community perspective, he's been the chairman of the board of the community that he lives at down in Florida. He's had a number of national roles with the U.S. Olympic Committee in fundraising and governance otherwise, and as an ancillary benefit to that, he had the chance to meet, I think, 8 different U.S. presidents, including Ronald Reagan, his real star, twice, which was a neat thing. But it's important for us to let people know, both as a family and as a business, that we're committed to giving back, and so we focus on the cities where we operate, and largely Philadelphia, and we focus on education, we focus on underserved youth, and the ways that we can use the resources we've been blessed with to make an impact for others.
Back to a strictly business question, how do you compete for talent? I run into different family businesses and then even publicly traded bigger businesses, and they you get everything from the bemoaning of the millennials and how they operate to just sort of a gap between jobs that we're training for and jobs that are required. You've got a big company that in many ways is on the forefront of that. How do you deal with that type of issue?
Sure, yeah, and again, it comes back to that whole thing of running the business as a business. So we have, all of the jobs in the company, from first line entry level up through top executive jobs, are all benchmark positions with job descriptions. They're compared to what comparable jobs would be in those industries. They're paid accordingly. There's training and development offered, all the things that any other company, whether they're public or private, would try to provide for that. So from that perspective, we feel good that we're paying where we should. The flip side of it is sometimes when we are competing for talent against large public companies, obviously those companies can provide stock options. We do have a phantom stock program, which bridges some of that gap. But at the end of the day, if somebody has a chance to go to another business where maybe there's an IPO in the offing or anything along those lines, periodically, I'd say once every couple of years, we wish that person well, and because they may have a chance to have a pretty unprecedented payday for their family. The other side of it is that a lot of people, and we've got a lot of executives with 10, 20-year, 30-year tenure with the business that recognize that that grass may not be greener on the other side, and they tell us both by returning and by what they say that they like the family aspect and the esprit de corps within our business, and the fact that as a private company we're able to take a longer-term view in terms of how we support our markets, how we price our jobs, and those kind of things, because we're not as consumed with the 90-day returns that our public competitors are. So it's really a combination of all those things in terms of competing for talent. And then the last thing, as you mentioned, we and everybody else, with having 3+ generations in the workforce, with the boomers and the Gen Xers and the millennials and even the folks behind them now, really trying to understand, because the value propositions are different for those different cohorts, and trying to understand how we can make sure that we're listening, that we're focused on innovation, that we're focused on digital and social and all the kinds of things that, for businesses like Day & Zimmermann, we're in the construction engineering business, the staffing business, the government contracting business. These may not on the surface seem like the sexiest businesses for a 20-something to come into, but we like to think that the way we approach the businesses with that list of things I just mentioned still make it an attractive place to come.
I was just at a conference yesterday where the CEO of an insurance company was talking about this subject, and he said when talking to millennials and they say, well, do you want to work for an insurance company? None of the hands go up. But then it's like, well, if you want to go to a company that's purpose-driven, that provides good income and is on the leading edge of what it's doing, would you like to be involved with that? And then the hands do shoot up. And so many times it's a messaging as part of what you're doing there that helps to break through.
For sure, yes.
So you're on the forefront of really kind of a compelling example of business succession and family succession gone right. And you've got the book that sort of encapsulates that through the story of your father. And you're now working on something called Familytics, which helps to bring these lessons to bear and to provide some advice to other people and other families that are going through this. Take us through that a little bit, and where obviously it came from your example in a way to, one sense, how to give back to the community on that front, but also do it in a business sense. Take us through what it is and what you're working on there.
Yeah, so, and the first topic I really talk about with Familytics is around succession, because of all the different issues that family businesses face. I believe by far the most challenging is succession. The statistics say that somewhere between 35 and 40% of businesses are successfully transferred from the first generation to the second, and then something like 12 to 15% to the third, and 3 to 4% to the fourth. So, the technical term I use is we suck at succession in the family business space. Now, a slight caveat, particularly on the first to second generation, is sometimes companies that are startups may be acquired, they may be merged, things may happen where there's no opportunity for succession. Or in other cases, you may have an entrepreneur who started a business and they've had some real success in it, and the gift or the legacy they're giving their children is not that business, but it's the spirit of entrepreneurship. And it's basically, hey, I've done mine, I've given you the skills, now you go do yours. So, but with that said, when you're talking about going from the first generation, which is, the patriarch or the matriarch kind of thing, to the second generation, which is typically that sibling, partnership or that sibling team, and then to the third generation, where you're into a cousin consortium. And in each one of those phases, things get progressively more complex, geometrically more complex almost, in terms of different aspirations, different skill sets. The introduction of spouses, it has a significant impact in terms of the kinds of values and ethos and priorities that offspring will have, and they're, the elements of esprit de corps on the one hand versus the desire to have people be independent, free-thinking people, particularly at that cousin phase, become a real challenge. So, one of the things that business probably don't spend enough time doing is focusing on the roles and the issues around ownership and stewardship of a business, as opposed to employment and management of a business. So as I transitioned out a lot of my work activities to write the book on Spike and think more broadly about family business governance and succession, I came up with this idea of Familytics, and I realized that over 25 years of owning and operating a business, I'd had the chance to have conversations with well over 100 other business-owning families. And in all those cases, I documented those conversations and kind of distilled them down to, their important parts of it. Plus, dozens and dozens of advisors along the way, too many conferences to mention. And really, recognize that, we talk today in the business world about analytics and big data and some of those kind of things. And the idea behind Familytics is how does that apply to the family business world? And so it's really not about, roll up your sleeves on the ground kind of facilitating a family business meeting or helping somebody sketch out an employment policy or those kind of things, but really looking at a higher level around what are the value systems, what are the master planning and roadmap activities, what are the elements of a family constitution, the real infrastructure, strategic initiatives and efforts and processes that families need to go through across generations to, hopefully ensure success. I have a very strong bias and passion for family businesses succeeding through the generations. That something like 65% of the U.S. GDP is family business driven. And worldwide in other parts of the world, it's even higher than that. And the whole idea of business being a way for families to work together and to make a difference in their communities and with their employees and customers is something that I'm real passionate about. And Familytics is really just trying to use not only the Yoh family and Day and Zimmerman's story, but these hundreds of other families and their stories as a way to help other businesses succeed and be successful. And the last comment I'll make on it is in terms of, our family and our succession. The book that I wrote talks about G1 to G2, meaning first generation and second generation. I was an active participant in G2, meaning our father, to G3, my siblings and I. And then now I'm, helping guide and work and lead with our business and our family in terms of succession from G3 to G4. And every one of the successions really is different from the one before it. And the thing I always like to say is that in our case, as the third generation, with the fourth generation, there are an infinite number of ways that G4 can choose to govern and steward the business. And the only one of those infinite number of ways we know that won't work is the one that we as G3 would come up with on our own without their input.
Right.
So it's really that balance of now we all have the gray hair, so how do you provide the gray hair experience and the best practices that we've learned, but combine that with that idea of accountability and ownership and paint on the hands of the succeeding generation to really own what the model looks like after they've come into control.
Well, what are some of those practices? How do you, and I'm not thinking ropes courses and things like that, but how do you get the generation following or even people within your current generation to communicate and work together without doing it on the crown jewel and risking major mistakes made at that level?
Yeah, and it's Fraser, it's a real challenge, particularly when you, as I said, get into that kind of cousin level. So our next generation has 11 members in it. 2 are married and have, and one has children, but the oldest is 35, the youngest is 12. So we've got a significant age. It's really almost a generation and a half within that. So, the couple best practices with that are, first and foremost, it's just communicate. And, the best way to do that is to spend time together. Something I picked up earlier this year at a conference was, if people are going to own or govern together, they need to know each other and they need to be friends. And in order to be friends, you have to spend time together. And so a lot of multi-generation family businesses will have on a regular, every maybe 12, 18 months, they'll have family weekends or family retreats or family vacations or things like that, which are a chance to get people together. There might be some light touch about business discussion, but it's more about just developing relationships and bonds and getting to know each other and build trust. And, in the book, I talk about a lot of these in our family came to be known as command performances. And ultimately, command performances end up having a bit of a negative tone in terms of our generation, in terms of being forced to go do things. But the other side to that coin is that if there's not some element of compelling people to come together, life being as busy as it is, that just won't happen. So it's really about that. The next part is, just learning from others. There's coaches, consultants, conferences, family business forums, YPO, seeking other businesses and having a chance to talk with them, because it really is it's a very unique set of stakeholders, family business owners. And I've, again, for decades I continue to be amazed how I will meet other owners of family businesses, and within minutes of meeting them, we are having a candid, very raw, very open, confidential discussion with total confidence that it's not going to go anywhere, because my stuff isn't any more complicated than their stuff, and their stuff isn't any more complicated than my stuff. And it's it's a great way to support and learn from others. And then the last thing as a practice for that is always making sure you're running a business like a business. And the moment that some of those ownership cracks or ownership misalignment or issues start to infiltrate their way into management and into decision making and into business is when employee engagement is going to slow down, turnover is going to increase, sales may slow down, customers may start to go elsewhere, and that death spiral can be pretty fast.
Right. I've seen it where what you just talked about, running a business like a business, when the business is run as a pure income generator to fund the Lamborghini habit of one of the family members, it can get dark very quickly, as you noted.
Absolutely, yes, and it's a shame because there's you can have businesses that can be 1, 2, 3, 5 generations old, and you never know when that's going to happen.
One of the lessons I've seen, too, and this goes back to your getting the communication right and getting it started early, the worst thing that can happen is when you're trying to resolve these issues when you're settling an estate. Because not only is that a complicated, awful process in and of itself, but you're dealing with a lot of emotions that are completely different from the business decisions that have to be made, and oftentimes the legal decisions that aren't part of your control. And to have that be the first experience where families are working together or even communicating together, that is not the crucible you want to be testing it under.
Right, exactly. No, and in fact, when I was first working on the whole idea of familytics, what really I felt was there was kind of a gap in the marketplace or in the service offering where you've got people that handle estate issues and people who do tax planning and governance planning and business succession and sort of more of the hard gut side of it. But as you just pointed out, a lot of that is intended to either avoid with or manage their way through those doomsday situations. And then on the front end, you've got certainly, psychologists and life coaches and facilitators and people who help break down a lot of the sort of communication issues and interpersonal issues and motivational and aspirational issues and those kind of things. But I think there's a space in between those two that really focuses on what are the core tools and, as I said earlier, the value systems and the roadmaps and the master planning efforts that can help a family align on, what things to focus on and when. So, for example, with our family, about 10 years ago, for 2 or 3 years, I spent a long time talking to a number of different, large, internationally well-known brand name family businesses down to, small first, second, third generation local shops, and came up with the whole idea of a master plan, because we would be working on the various things we'd be working on as an ownership family, and then we'd find, oh, gosh, we'd not contemplated when we'd put a fiduciary board in place, or we'd not contemplated if there's ever going to be a foundation or a family office or a dividend policy or a liquidation plan or all these different things. So eventually we put together a master plan that's just a very simple short-term, medium-term, long-term, and just these little, dots or buckets or squares that have all these different things that an owning family needs to focus on. And my belief is it's not as important the order that those things are in or which one comes before each other else, but it's the conversation you have to know that, A, we've got everything covered, and B, are we all aligned that we should be dealing with items 1, 7, and 5 long before 2, 4, and 6 kind of thing. And I'm not sure that families spend as much time about that because they work on the interpersonal side, they work on the estates and the wealth planning and all that, but that middle part is really where Familytics is trying to help out.
Sure. So how do you, when you're talking to families or maybe from the examples that you've seen, how do you think about staffing around that? Or maybe a better way to put it is, at what point did the advisors that help you become successful, are they not necessarily appropriate for the new challenges that you've faced or now are graduated into?
Sure. Yeah. No. And that's a real challenge because that obviously you want people who know you, but there's a whole expression about familiarity breeds contempt as well. So we, for example, as our ownership group, we have worked with 3 different primary family business consultants, and the first one, and they sort of each fit the stages of where the business was. So the first one, as I mentioned earlier on, was about helping us with communications and interpersonal dynamics and those kind of things. Then we moved on largely to talking about more business strategy type things and ownership's role in growth and something that was more about ownership as an asset into the business. And then we eventually graduated out of that to now the phase that we're in is really talking about large multi-generation succession. So we're now working with a coach and an organization who really that's their bread and butter. So I think it's being aware of what, as some people like to say, what the stages and ages of your business, where are you in terms of how that evolves? And then from a board perspective, whether you have an advisory board or a fiduciary board, that whole idea of term limits can be a very difficult thing to come to terms with, because you spend a lot of time getting people up to speed. You build that trust. They start to learn where your blind spots are, where your strengths are, and they can be a good mirror for you. On the other hand, you want to make sure you're continuing to infuse new talent and new ideas and new ways of thinking. So it really becomes, and sometimes a bit of an engineering exercise to make sure you're retaining that advice and that input and that stewardship for people who know you well, but then continuing to refresh it with people who are maybe more current or have a different lens in terms of the way business runs today.
Really cool. Bill, lots of great lessons from you. How do we get a hold of Our Way? What's the best way to get a copy of the book?
Sure. Well, it's available on Amazon. If you just search Our Way, O-U-R Way, and Bill Yoh, you'll find it, and it's available in a number of different formats. And I also have a website, which is ourwaybook.com, which that'll link you back to Amazon. It also, in there, talks about Famalytics, so there's more information to find on that. And then finally, on Facebook, I have an author page. So if you search Bill Yoh author, and that's Y-O-H is the last name, on Facebook, you can like and follow that page. And I update that page periodically with different events that I'm doing in various states, and also different excerpts from the book and other thought leadership pieces that I've written and been involved with. So, and I'd love to have conversations with anybody about any of the topics we've discussed and see how we can help each other have better family businesses together.
Terrific. Bill, thank you for being on.
Thanks, Fraser.
You've been listening to my conversation with Bill Yoh. He's the author of Our Way, the story of Philadelphia businessman Spike Yoh. By the way, this was our 25th podcast. We've been doing this for over 2 years now. You can find other podcasts at FraserRice.com. Thanks again and have a great day.